business development in more than 20 countries with brands as diverse as Kendall Jackson to boutique Canadian wineries. Alison is a seasoned international trade professional. Since opening her own Vancouver-based consulting and exporting agency in 2014, she has worked with hundreds of companies advising and training on export, import, and representing premium goods across the globe. So welcome, Alison, and thank you for being here with us today. Before you start, I'll ask Ruben to explain our guests about the questions.
Thank you, Perla, and thank you, Alison. We are very happy to have you today here. Just for all the participants, feel free to make your questions through this link I'm posting there. This is a Slido account, so you can type in your questions and we will read all the questions at the end of the presentation. So feel free to make the question you have at any time. Thank you, Alison. The stage is yours.
Thank you very much. Let's get started. I will get my screen up there. And of course, I have to ask the mandatory question. Can you see my screen? I'm seeing lots of nods. Wonderful, wonderful. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for giving us your lunch hour to talk about international trade and careers in international trade. I'm honored to be here. So thank you to Perla and the IBM Club for inviting me. She was just reminding me that she heard me give a course on travel and trade shows, and it does make me miss that I'm not so active in the trade show circuit anymore. I'm usually on the one side of the trade show booth being a customer now, not so much the other side, but we will talk about both sides. And I am going to get right into it. Please put lots of questions in Slido. My presentation is extremely short, because I really want to focus on what you want to learn and what interests you have. So my name is Alison Bolton. I have a Bachelor of Commerce degree from both the University of Victoria and an MBA from Halt University I actually went to school in Shanghai and Dubai. It's actually based in Boston, the heart of MBA world, I think. And so today we're going to just go through a nice flow talking about my academic background, the steps I've taken in my career, always lessons learned. And then, as Ruben kindly said, we will go into all your questions via the Slido. And so for academics, which I believe most of you are in the thick of right now, I believe strongly in learning. And so good for you for being here. Simply pat yourself on the back for taking out an afternoon of your time on a beautiful sunny day to learn about other people's experiences and the road they have taken. When I talk about academics, I often encourage people to go far. And it's because it's the path I took. I am from a small town in Manitoba. I grew up with more cattle than people, and I decided to then take the leap. I went into the city in Manitoba. I went to the capital city, Winnipeg, to go to high school. Then I traveled 3 provinces across, which, you know, in Europe could be about 6 countries, to go to Victoria. And then I started doing co-ops. I did everything from government to starting my own company. And then I started going on exchanges, and I lived in Indonesia. I went to school there. As I briefly mentioned, I went to school in Shanghai and Dubai. And something else that I mentioned that is often overlooked, because when you're in school, you're so focused on school. You're so focused on group projects, and you're wondering about your next internship, and you're wondering what you're going to do. And you think of those, you know, those potentially pesky electives. Well, I took anthropology, I took environmental economics, and those have absolutely shaped my career path today. The anthropology course opened me up to cultures, and I really credit it to making me interested in not just business, but in international business, because it introduced me to the possibilities around the world. Environmental economics introduced me 30 years ago to the idea of carbon credits, which made sense, and we're still trying to push them, but it added another element to me as an interesting business person who not only had a broad spectrum of things that I'd learned, and I'm just going to close my door because I'm in downtown Vancouver and it's really noisy, as you can tell. And so when I talk about electives, I do want you to take some random ones. It can be very tempting to take ones that are strictly in line with business or strictly in line with what you think your career path is going to be. But really, your career path isn't going to be what you think it is. I didn't expect to end up in wine. I didn't expect to end up living in Shanghai with almost as many people in one city as there are in the entire country I grew up in. But because of those electives and the people I met, the books I was exposed to, that really shaped my career. So I do encourage people to take that leap, take something you've always been interested in, take a philosophy course, take something that you can to broaden your world, because it will come back into play. From my career steps, and I don't joke, I didn't have the beautiful, I don't know where that is, in the Grand Canyon maybe, I didn't have that beautiful rock there, but I came from a town of about 800 people on a good day. And so when I started out, going to a classroom with 200 people was a lot. That was more people than I thought I might know on the entire planet. But at UVic, I became involved in clubs like you're joining today. I was on the Bachelor of Commerce Student Society. I was on the University Student Society. I took those co-ops. The co-ops I took were everything from tourism. I was at the front counter at Tourism Victoria, telling people to go on a whale watching tour, kindly explaining that no, they actually didn't take a bridge from Vancouver to Victoria. They got on a ferry and they took a boat. Not joking. It seems like an urban legend, but people would get upset with us. And they're like, no, we drove here. We're like, that is amazing. If you can find that on a map, we would love to see that map. But that was another type. It introduced me to tourism business. I did another one with the government. I worked with Canada Revenue Agency. I worked answering people's tax questions. That gave me a huge understanding of regulations, of paperwork, of dealing with people on the phone in stressful situations. And then I took every opportunity to do exchanges. And I went to Indonesia at a time when I couldn't find Indonesia on a map. But when they were asking for what your top 5 countries were, I said, well, I'm sure I can get to Germany on my own. I definitely can get to San Francisco on my own. I have family in the UK. I've heard of Spain. I put number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, and number 5. I listed Gadjah Mada University in Yogyakarta in Indonesia. And no surprise, they sent me to Indonesia. And that was when I truly say my career in international trade began. Because I had traveled, I backpacked through Europe and I loved it. I went to Indonesia. I was there for 4 months. I traveled around Asia. I had Christmas in Thailand. I had my birthday in Nepal. I was on a plane ride home and I promised myself that I would be back in Asia for longer than a visa. It did take a long time. It did take a decade, but I ended up there because of my international MBA. Again, that mindset of going far, taking that leap, doing what is not comfortable because you can. Taking an international MBA is what I chose because there was support. I had been to China. I'd been to Beijing on a work trip. I traveled around a bit by myself. I'd never been to Shanghai. I'd never been to Dubai, but I took this opportunity. I got accepted at UBC. I got accepted at Sauder and said, you know, my life isn't going to change that much if I go to Sauder. My friends are going to typically stay the same. My work, I was running the winery by then. My work is definitely going to keep finding me because it's not going to be an international call. So they're going to keep asking me. And it pushed me to really go out of my comfort zone. And that international MBA I had the dream leaving Indonesia to go back. And then the international MBA, I sold my car. I packed up a few boxes and put them in my best friend's garage. And I took off to China. I did my MBA in both Shanghai and Dubai because, again, I wanted another experience. And so I put myself in a country and really in cultures that I didn't have a lot of experience with. I was fortunate because Indonesia is a predominantly Muslim country. I had experience with that religion, but not in a Middle Eastern context. I finished my degree there. Of course, a benefit of that, and you're all learning now, is your network. I had no idea when I signed up to go to China that I would meet people from over 60 countries and call them classmates. And I still work that network today. I have a British friend, a Kiwi friend, all in Vancouver now that I met in downtown Shanghai. That international MBA led me to forward into the next steps of my career, which I will talk about. And what I also wanted to focus on was the sectors that my career has had. This really started because the University of Victoria, when you choose a major, you don't choose finance, accounting, marketing. You choose tourism, entrepreneurship, international business. And because of that mindset early on, I had a job in tourism. I have had jobs in government. I worked in technology, and unexpectedly, I did end up in the wine world. In the tourism sector, as I mentioned, I learned a lot about service, about dealing with people. That definitely shaped my ability to be a salesperson. Government. Anyone in international trade knows that you're going to be dealing with the government, typically 2, maybe more. The understanding of paperwork, the understanding of step-by-step bureaucracy, and that things are going to take time, no matter how much of a hurry you personally are in. Technology. I was in the fast-moving technology world. I was in there during an up period where we had a full fridge and a ping pong table, and we had chairs that were, more than I paid for my monthly apartment rent, because that was the way of the world. And then I got laid off because there was the economic crisis. And all of a sudden it was like, 9/11 happened. It was the bottom. Because of something I'm going to mention later in this presentation, they kept me on. I was able, and this is before we all had laptops and phones, I was able to stay in their office and I would do some work free for them. And in return, I got their computer, their internet, an office, this amazing thing called a fax machine that I could use, and that I was able to kickstart my next career. And that career took me into the world of wine. And in the wine industry, remember I'm this Manitoba farm kid? My parents, my poor parents, who said, how much did we work and how much money did we spend? So our child would leave the farm and not be a farmer. And now she's looking at the weather forecast again. Oh my goodness. And the wine aspect I was in is actually ice wine. So you're worried about the summer temperatures and the grapes ripening and enough rainfall, but then you're also waiting for it to freeze, because ice wine is a Canadian luxury good that you pick the grapes, same grape as you drink in your, the Merlot with supper, but it has to freeze. It has to get, by law, this is not a winemaker decision. This is by law. You cannot pick those grapes until it is -8 or colder, which, if you've studied any aspect of weather, is typically from 2 a.m. until sunrise. So I was out, my poor parents, I've had, how many degrees, how many of these lovely co-ops. I'm in a farm with movie set lights, generators going, a team of 40 people picking grapes at 4 a.m. However, my 10 years in the wine industry was invaluable. And what it really helped me do is talk about these roles, is because all of these roles that I mentioned here, sales, operations, being a leader, being a doer, not only are what I have done, who I am, but I did all of those roles in one company in the wine industry. And that's something that I encourage people to really strive for. Crying baby. There we go. And so in my roles at the winery is where I did want to encourage all of you. It's kind of a cliche, put your hand up, try new projects. But it's the truth, because you'll find out what you like in a safe environment where the opportunity cost is very low. I was able to start, I was hired because the winery needed someone in marketing, and I was hired as a marketing gal. I was supposed to do the website, design brochures, get our pitch deck up. I ended up doing sales around the world. I ended up doing operations, ordering our bottles, ordering our corks, figuring out logistics, doing the customs. I ended up, after 10 years, I was the director of operations and I was running a whole team. I had 40 people in the vineyard. I had a winemaker. I had a sales team, both in BC, Canada, and the world. And I always remained a doer. If we had a big order going out, I was in the warehouse. I was in the warehouse. The team laughed. I would roll in from a trade show. I've got lipstick on, hair's done, high heels, be back in 10 minutes. Steel-toed boots, get my jeans on, order a pizza. We're all working on that order because the truck was coming the next morning at 9 a.m. and we had to have this order ready. And those are the types of roles that sometimes when people come out of business degrees, they say, that's not for me. And one of my roles when I worked right after university, I worked at the University of Victoria. They hired me in their business, their co-op and career center. And I worked with a lot of tourism graduates. And the people who had come out of the tourism program, and I will pick on the MBAs, the people who came out of the MBA tourism program wanted a job at a 5-star hotel as an assistant general manager. And I, being younger than them, but have been dealt with the GMs because I was the liaison, tried not to laugh. Because if anyone has been in the hospitality industry, especially the hotel industry, you're not waltzing into an assistant general manager role. You need to be a front desk clerk. You need to do the night audit, which is painful, and plus it's in the middle of the night. You should know how to clean a room. You should know how to bus a table. You need all of that experience to understand what your team is going through, to understand the pressures your team faces, so that when you get into the C-suite, when you are that leader, you can understand what they're doing. You've been there. You can also jump in and completely shock them when you jump in and help bus a table. Undercover Boss made this, the most famous way to do it, but it's always been my preferred style of leadership because respect is given and it's earned. And I find that embracing as many of the different roles as you can across as many sectors as you can in all that you do, you're going to be more interesting. You're going to understand more part of it. And as I said before, you are going to be a better leader. And if you can do it in that same company, the opportunity cost is so low. You can be seconded to somewhere for one project, 4 weeks. You can try and support the sales team to understand what it's like in sales. You can go work in the warehouse and even observe for half a day and see how fast that warehouse moves. See who's managing the paperwork. See if there's a way, because you come in with different experiences, you can improve that process. You can make things more streamlined, or you can stop trying to improve the process because the way you thought you were going to improve it won't work because it's just not possible once you're actually living and breathing in that environment. And so I'm now going to summarize this by coming back, talking about all these roles that I had at the winery for 10 years. When I finished my degree, so I did my 10 years at the winery, and then I went overseas. So I do say, often to be brave and do things a little differently. When I did my MBA, I was about a dozen years older than most of my classmates. And I will still strongly advocate for people not doing an MBA straight out of Bachelor of Commerce because they learned a lot from me and I was struggling to learn from them. I learned culture from them. I learned generational interesting things from them, but they didn't have the business experience of being in those roles to be able to contribute back. And that's why when I finished in Shanghai, finished my schooling, I was one of very few students who stayed in Shanghai and was able to find a job. Because it is very difficult. China overall, I had a step in because my wine buyer, the Chinese company that bought the wine that I made in Canada, they hired me. They hired me as their director of trade sales for all of China. And so then I had one of the best jobs in the world. I traveled around China selling wine, which was pretty awesome. And I did that for a couple of years and I was traveling all over. I lived in Shanghai. I got to understand the Canadian community in China. I was able to participate at, big events where the premier came over and we had all sorts of fun. And I was also able to do those roles again. I was pouring wine. I was collecting dishes. I was washing glasses at a trade show booth, which let me tell you is not fun. But all of those gave me an appreciation and ability, even though that management style is so different than China. I had the luxury of being the blonde. So of course they expected me to do things differently, but they saw it. They couldn't believe that I would be in there washing dishes. They couldn't believe that I would be, talking to the consul general that came by or the ambassador, because there just wasn't that different cultural ranking. But from those experiences of taking a risk, taking those strange electives, doing all those different sectors and always taking on those different roles, I really feel that that is a way to make, again, and I've said it before, make your career and therefore your life interesting. Lessons learned. Keep learning. As I just said, I did my degree, I did my exchanges, I worked in tech, I worked in government, I worked at the winery for 10 years, and then I went back to school, because then I could just full circle and say all this I learned and then apply it all over again. Keep learning is so important, because otherwise you're going to stagnate. And you don't have to keep learning the same things. You don't need to know, I don't know all there is to know about new wine regions or natural wines, but I'm still engaged. I'm learning about new production techniques, for example, but you're always learning. Have a life. And this ties into me saying, be interesting, do interesting things. No one wants to, talk to you if you've done the same thing for 20, 30 years, even 2 to 5 years. You say, come on, take a risk, do something, have a life, because you're going to learn something, back to learning, from everyone you meet. And sometimes that really comes down to being brave. You've got to take that risk. You've got to take that elective where you're not going to know anyone in the room. You've got to move to that city where you don't know anyone. And so much of this, I kind of nickname it cross-training for the brain, because you're going to keep building your story, which as a pure business sense is you're building your brand. But what you're building behind the scenes is your why this is interesting to you, why you're good at this, because you'll continually learn and you'll continually grow your career. And in international trade, it's so important, because even if I went to the same trade show every single year, it might be at a different venue. There's going to be different people. There's going to be different competitors. There's going to be different customs brokers, suppliers that I can meet. It's also the way that you tie it in to being different. And that is how, if you're talking about finding a job, if you're talking about Perla honoring me with the opportunity to be here, you're having a life, you're being different, you have an interesting story. And something I always tell people is it's the really not so secret advice is to network. And again, you are all doing it already by being here, because you want to do it every day. You want to have a wide swath of people and industries and sectors, but you do want to do it wisely, because time is precious. So it means don't keep talking to the same people all the time. Don't always go to the same trade shows. Go to something different. I actually, no joking, have in my notes that says, don't be a jerk, because whether you think it's strategic or whether you think it's conniving, you're going to meet these people again and again. And we all think we're super nice. We all think that we know who the jerk is in the room. Well, don't be that person. And it seems so basic, but it's even more important. And whatever the motivation is, because they might hire you one day, but you might hire them one day. And so just really keep that, because I have found that it makes your career so much better. The company that hired me in Shanghai had known me for 5 years. They had seen me in the Okanagan, in the vineyard. They had seen me back in those heels and lipstick at a trade show. They have seen me at the office negotiating. And even when we had tough times in an international trade, paperwork, there's mistakes. Containers get left out in the sun with wine, which means it's about to ruin if you don't get it off that sunny deck in 2 hours. You're having all sorts of conditions to go through, and you need to maintain that professionalism and that humanity to understand each other. And it's tough because there's things that go wrong, there's cultural differences, even just time. We all did a very Canadian thing today. Perla said, can you please come 15 minutes early? We're going to do a test. We're going to have a chat. 12 o'clock. It was like, okay, we're opening up the room. We're starting on time. When I went to school in Shanghai, we again, classmates from around the world, said, okay, you have an 11 o'clock meeting. What time does everyone show up? Canadian, 10:55. I might linger outside. Do I know where the office is? I said. Oh, I know where I'm going. Okay, 10:55, I'm going to roll in. Well, my friend Petri from Norway, are you kidding, Allison? That is late. You need to show up at 11:15, no question. And that's touch and go. Ernesto from Venezuela is like, oh my gosh, you people, so much stress. If I roll in at 11:30, life is good. And it's that type of just jaw dropping. Are you kidding me? And I said, don't ever show up half hour late for a meeting in Canada, please, without sending 3 text messages and an email and maybe posting on Twitter. But it's that type of understanding that helps you network because you're empathetic. And sure, maybe your meeting is now only 15 minutes, but at least you can have it because you're going to keep building that. And that is going to be part of your brand, right? Your story that will be so important, especially in international trade, because people aren't all the same. People don't all think the same. And really, those are my talking points for today. So I'm going to hand it over. I think, Ruben, you're going to run the questions.
That's right, Alison. Thank you. I will start to reading the questions in the order they appear in the Slido. The first question we have is, with your international experience, why do you decide to establish your company in Canada and not China?
Excellent question. And I think it goes back to how difficult it is to start a company in China. If my husband had been Chinese and spoke fluent Mandarin, different story, might have been a lot different. But it is complicated. And I knew that my client base was going to be Canadian. And I knew that when you're selling a product like wine or food, you need to be there to see that product, especially, even when you're just putting it on a pallet and getting on a boat. And I also knew that because my Mandarin was never fluent, I needed a Chinese partner to be selling. I needed one in Hong Kong. I needed one in South Korea. So it was the decision to build my base, and also Canada is my home. And that I also, being very fortunate with not only Canada, but Vancouver, there was such a large international population here, especially of the Asian countries I was targeting. I was able to meet those buyers because they were coming to Canada. I would still go overseas, but it really came down to the fact where my customers were, where I was comfortable, and where I could hire people to do different jobs. And it came down to the fact that when I was getting clients, I needed to be the face in Canada, and I could have a team in China or Korea or Hong Kong.
Awesome. Thank you, Alison. The next question is, what would you say helped you to be successful salesperson in another country? Sorry.
I think that is really, and I give my rural Canadian farmer parent roots credit for that. I talk to everybody anytime. I didn't have to accept Perla's LinkedIn message. I could have said, no, don't want to do it. Oh, otherwise, it's interesting. Oh, I've never heard of this. What's this? You're curious. You're interesting. Talk to people. And to be successful in sales, people focus on the closing and 100%. But before you can close, you have to open. And you have to be able to talk to people. And you also have to understand the sales cycle in different cultures. If you're at a trade show in Canada and I'm selling wine and I'm wearing the same outfit, I've got the same wine, the prices won't be the same, but they'll be relatively the same. If I talk to a Canadian buyer, we're going to talk about the wine, we're going to talk about the story, we're going to talk about maybe their restaurant. maybe at the end of 10 minutes, I'll be like, oh, would you like a price sheet? Would you like to know how much it is? Same trade show in Shanghai, it's either the first or second question, how much is it? Totally different. There are Canadian winemakers, wine reps who would go, oh, but you don't know about the winery. You don't know about our terroir. You can't ask the price. That's not important. Well, you've just insulted your potential buyer. You've made them in an Asian context, but in a worldwide context, you've made them lose face. You've embarrassed them. You've taken them back into their shell. Oh, thank you very much. They're gone. Do they want that feeling? Is that the feeling that they want to develop a relationship? No. So you have to put yourselves in your buyer's shoes. And I think that's international. And I think that's anywhere in the world. I also think in terms of sales specifically, you have to be open to different forms of communication. If you're doing business in China, you need to have WeChat on your phone. Hands down. You can't do business. You can barely order a bowl of ramen in China without WeChat because that's how everyone pays now. No one has cash. But if you go to Korea, I believe you're online, or someone's going to be on Telegram, or someone is going to use Skype. You've got to be open to that. We are so obsessed with email in Canada. My Chinese friends open their email once a month. If you're lucky, I would WeChat them and say, can you please check your email? I need you to read that document. And they'd be like, send it to me in WeChat. I'm like, well, I can, but I need you to see the whole email chain. And so it's that type of thing that you need to be open to be successful. And again, international or here. So yes, that's my.
Yeah, the awareness of cultures and differences.
Yeah.
There is a very related question, the next one. And one of the participants asked, how can I reach new clients in a new country?
There's lots. The good news is there's lots of ways. I think you start with LinkedIn. You start with, take a step back. You make sure that that new country is correct. Don't assume that that country wants your product, or don't assume that they don't. We sold most of our wine, we sold to Asia because it was ice wine. They loved the sweetness. Most table wineries that make the Merlot with your supper, they sell to Europe because those are the people that understand their product. They understand table wine. Ice wine, they're like, meh, not as interested in. So first question is make sure that's the right country you're going to, and that there's a fit, and that the sales trajectory, the trends are going up, because you don't want to be on the tail end of a trend if pricing is changing or if they're getting bored of it. Presuming all of that is correct, get on LinkedIn, get on social media, the right social media. There's no point in being on Facebook and Instagram going to China because you need a VPN. It's very rarely used. You've got to be on their platforms, like I mentioned, the WeChat, the Weixin, and get some sort of presence. You also want to work with the trade representatives. So if you wanted to sell to Germany, Canada has trade representatives probably in Munich, Berlin, Frankfurt, probably Stuttgart, other countries that you can contact. Their whole job is to help Canadian companies sell products in Germany. They want to help you. They might have a list of buyers. You also want to talk to the German Consul General Trade Office here in Vancouver. They're not as interested in helping you because their job is to sell German products here, but they will have events with the German community. And that's where you want to be, because there's always traders, there's always agents going back and forth. You want to sign up for every and any newsletter you can in that industry for that country, because you just want to start understanding the players. You also want to understand how they buy, because the sales process could be different. So you want to make contact with them, but you need to know, for example, in Japan and in Korea, they buy so much through agents. They know it increases the price, but that's how they do business, because they want to deal with a Korean agent based in Seoul. They're fine with it costing more. That's how they do it. You trying to go direct, that's not how we do it here. So that means from learning that, you're understanding who the companies are, the stores are, the contacts are that you want to meet, but you realize that you need to find an agent because that's how business is done. So I think it's really going at it from all angles, being persistent, and absolutely, when you can, going to events, both at home, I'm calling home Vancouver, and in the new market. And you don't necessarily have to have a trade show booth. You can go and walk a trade show. Don't be pulling your products out of your bag and selling them, because that's not cool, and trade show vendors really frown on that. But you can go and talk to people and see who's there and suss out your competition and see if there's some partners and see what is going on in that world. And that, I think, is a great way to start building that, because you go to the trade show for a couple of days, you don't fly home on the last day of the trade show. You stay for 4 days after, because you want to have meetings with all of those people you met. You want to stay there. You've just spent what? Anywhere from $500 to $5,000 on just a plane ticket and accommodation and everything. Utilize your time there. And even if you don't get as many meetings, I went to every wine store that I could find in walking distance of my hotel. I took pictures, I saw the prices, I took their business cards. So when I did find my agent, I could say, this store looked really good, and they already have dessert wine from France, so they understand dessert wine. So make as much, take as much of a learning course, back to that learning, that you can whenever you go to a new market.
Awesome. Who wants to become an exporter?
I think the first thing to do is decide two things. What's your specialty, as in which geography, where are you selling to? Or what's your product that you have a specialty for? So if if your mother tongue is Spanish, then why are you going to sell to France? Go somewhere that's Spanish, because then you have an advantage. Or if, for me, I met some people who just love furniture. Their furniture is what they want to export. And so they're going to try and either match those, or you're going to start by finding furniture brands that are looking to export, because you can't do everything all at once. You've got to pick your target market. In a perfect world, you have a furniture company that wants to go to Spain, or a furniture company that wants to go to Colombia, maybe don't sell them teak furniture because Colombia already has beautiful teak wood forest kind of thing, but, do that research to see where you should go and what you want to sell. Those are the first steps, because that's going to dictate everything else.
I see. Excellent advice. We have another question, another request for advice. And this is, what is your advice to choose wisely the network?
When I say network wisely, it is really because we all have a limited amount of time. So as much as I say stretch yourself, don't stretch yourself to the point of wasting your time. So I went to, I can't remember the name of the conference, but it happens in the spring. It's a giant technology conference. And I was there poking around, and I went to a session on quantum computing, pardon me. It was an hour session, and I sat in, heard the introduction to the speakers, understood the basics. 20 minutes in, I was like, I don't think I understand this language. And I walked. I am never going to sell anything to do with quantum computing. I am probably never going to knowingly use quantum computing. And my brain hurt. I was not a productive use of my time. I left. So that's the wise part, is it's the same as a job. Don't get stuck somewhere that isn't going to benefit you. I had a job where I walked to work crying, and I left work crying because I hated it so much. And it was in sales. I thought I was a terrible salesperson. No, it was a terrible company. And so I had to get out of there quickly. And that was scary. I was 25, 24. I didn't have a lot of New work and from wasn't okay. And so that's the wise part, is don't make yourself stay in a situation. Don't take the hard road just because it's hard. Sometimes it's okay if it's easy.
Thank you, Alison. Our last question for today's session is, how do you stand out from other sellers or competitors?
Well, I think that's an entire, university course. So trying to do that is, again, you're going to go, okay, your USP, your unique selling proposition. You're not just going to go, my wine is the best. Everyone's like, oh, I roll. Everyone's wine is the best. What makes it different? And not just what makes it different for me in Canada, what makes it different for those people that are buying it in Mexico? Why is it special for them? I can tell them all I want about the flavors and the raspberries and the strawberries, but they're like, but does it go with cigars? I was like, oh, I'd never been asked that question before. I'm like, I don't know. Let's try. Let's walk outside the trade show, light a cigar, pour some wine, and let's see. So let me tell you, that makes you stand out, right? Right there, you're like, you say, I don't know is one, but there is no cut and clean answer to that, because it's really going to depend on your market. It's going to depend on the product, the service. The number one piece of advice I can say to answer that question is put yourself in your buyer's shoes. What would make you stand out for them? Is it going to be price? Is it going to be exceptional customer service? Is it going to be that you're going to fly over there and train all their staff? When we sold wine to restaurants in China, I was up in front of everyone from the bus people to the servers to the hostesses to the chefs. I had 100 people in front of me. I had a picture of a grape on the screen because they'd never had wine before. Wine is not common for a lot of people, especially outside of the tier 1, the major cities. You wanted to see if that restaurant chain bought wine from us? You bet they did, because I spent an afternoon there with a translator teaching their staff. Learning is so important in China. They loved it. They all got to try ice wine. 370 milliliters is $100 for retail there. They got to try that wine. They bought our wine. They possibly keep buying our wine, because that was something that other people weren't willing to do. Not just the sampling, not just the time, but I went there. I opened a wine shop where a tractor went down the main road in front of me as like a bus instead. And I'm in here selling wine for 1,000 different wines, but for $1,000. I was like, whoa. Other wineries wouldn't go. They said, not worth my time. But we did it. And again, it is, in China, you have the term guanxi for your network and for those people to do it, because that's the relationship you build. And it's not going to be a one-off. It's going to be a long-term. So I think it's the standing out is, if you were the buyer, what would you like? What do they value? And there's nothing the matter with, when you can, asking that question. Especially if they're looking at changing. Why are you leaving? Just like in a job interview, why are you leaving? Flip that. Why is this position open? Those types of questions that you want to learn.
Thank you, Alison.
Well, it seems those are all the questions. And